Hey guys, what is up? It's Antonio. Welcome back to another episode here on Gladiator Disc Golf. I'm super excited about today's game because we're not talking about distance, we're not even talking about form, we're talking about a great simple drill to help you improve your approach game. Learning how to approach the basket has always been an important aspect in disc golf, but a lot of times golfers kind of get clouded and distracted by distance. You know, everybody wants to throw 300 and then they want to throw 400 and then 500, so on and so forth. And sometimes we forget that it doesn't matter how far you can throw. If you're not confident in those 150-foot shots, you're not going to get birdie or even safe par. And the best way to do that is to head to a field and work on some open approach shots. But what about approaches that aren't in an open field? A lot of times I'm approaching the basket and I have a tree in the way. What do I do there? Very glad you shared that concern with me because that is definitely something that working in the field does not have. However, depending on the field you're in, you can make simple modifications to your approach practice, and I will be showing you some of those tips today. So let's go ahead and let's start with the open field and then we'll get to modified practice. What I have behind me is a very simple drill. I have 4 cones laid out basically in a diamond. The first cone is about 100 feet from where I'll be throwing. The back cone is 200 feet from where I'll be throwing. And the 2 corners on the sides, those are about 150 feet from where I'm throwing. The goal for this drill is to throw 1 disc at every cone and get within 15 feet of that cone. Why 15 feet? Well, that number can change depending on the skill you're trying to work on. But for right now, I want to try and get as close to the cone, which is simulating the basket. If I can get inside 15 feet, it's basically a tap in. Today I'm working with 2 brand new discs. I'm a little bit familiar with one over the other, but I'm working with 2 discs from Storm Disc. I'm working with the Crater, which is an overstable approach disc, and I'm working with the Radar, which is a neutral flying putter. After today's video, if these are some discs that you're interested in and want to check out, head over to Storm Discs and use my discount code GLADIATOR for 15% off your entire purchase. The very first shot, that 100-foot shot, was definitely a little bit in my head. I pulled it a little bit, but because I threw it nice and soft, the disc faded back towards the cone and got probably within about 20 feet, so not quite my goal. So that's something that I need to just, throw a couple shots, get that warmed up. But it definitely gave me an idea of what the wind was doing. So it was a great wind read. On the second one, when I threw it to the furthest right cone, I threw it with a little bit too much hyzer, and because there's a left to right wind and it's also kind of a headwind, it pushed it down with that little hyzer a little bit short of the cone. So I made the correction. When I went for the furthest left cone, I threw it still with hyzer so I could fight that headwind, because you see, I was throwing in a different direction. And if I threw it the same as I threw with the previous cone, it would have turned over. But because I was throwing more directly into the headwind in that direction, I threw it on a little bit more hyzer and I parked the cone. Then the final one was the 200-foot cone. This cone I took a little bit of a walk up so I could control my power a little bit better than doing just a standstill shot, especially because I'm trying to focus on touch here. And that shot I threw with a little bit of hyzer because I was putting a little more juice on it and I wanted to cut through the wind. So I learned 2 main things in that first round of the drill. The first is that first shot is going to give me a great wind read. The second is that I need to learn how to control my angles, especially when dealing with wind. Now we're going to work with some forehand shots. All right, so a couple things with those shots. The very first one was one to get a little bit of a wind read and kind of just get comfortable with that distance. The midi did a great job, inside 15 feet, easy. The second shot, because I was throwing forehand, was the furthest left cone directly into the headwind. I really wanted to fight this headwind, so I put a little bit too much on it, meaning I put too much juice and not enough hyzer. So what ended up happening is that I tried throwing it harder and flat, and I actually ended up turning it over, and with a headwind, it wasn't having enough time to fight back with it being only 150 feet away. The third shot was the furthest one, 200 feet. And with the fighting wind, on the forehand, I really felt like I needed to put a little bit more on it. I definitely put way too much juice on that disc, and I threw it about 215, 220 into the headwind. So it was great to see that result, but it's not what I needed right here. So I need to dial in that 200-foot touch shot into a headwind. And then the fourth and final one was actually an interesting angle choice. So it's the crater that I've been throwing the most, and so it's slightly beat in. What I was super shocked about is that even though I threw it on the hyzer with the left to right wind basically going to push it away from the cone, it actually flipped up and finished very close to the cone. So I was pretty shocked at that, and just seeing the varying stabilities, even though I've only been throwing that one crater for about a month longer than the other ones, it's really cool to see how it's beating in quite nicely. So let's go ahead, let's grab these discs, and then we're going to attack these cones from a tailwind direction. One of the situations that we're working on now is a tailwind. One great thing about this drill is that you don't ever have to move the cones. You just move yourself and the direction you're throwing. And I strongly recommend that you try to use this drill on a slightly to pretty windy day. You can never control the weather at a disc golf tournament, but you can control when you go out to practice. And if it's a windy day, maybe instead of doing distance practice or hitting the course, go to the field and work on some approach drills, because it's during the wind that your approach shots can really feel off. And when you can dial in and get comfortable throwing into the wind and with the wind, it will help build your confidence and decrease your score. So a couple things I learned. That very first one, the backhand 100-foot touchy up shot, is definitely something that gives me a little bit of issue. Was a little overstable on nose up, but I'm still within 15 feet. The second approach shot was absolute money. Threw it nice and low, knowing that the tailwind was gonna push it a little bit further, so it dug into the ground and sat right near the cone. The third one was another great throw, but I threw it a little bit too hard, so it was definitely flying a little too fast, and with the tailwind, it did not settle near the basket. And then the fourth one, I just don't even want to talk about what happened there. It was just trying to juice it, a little bit of oat, and throwing it with too much ante when I didn't need to be throwing it with ante. So that's just form on that aspect, and not slowing things down, trying to do too much. Two things I learned from this forehand approaches. The first one is something that I've been working on probably for about a year now, but is on super close forehand approach shots, limit my arms movement. So I don't want to use my elbow too much. I certainly don't want to be loading up too much with my legs. I actually want to keep it all on the wrist. Using just the wrist isolates the movement and allows you to throw it a little bit shorter than if you really threw a full shot into it. The other thing that I learned that I should have known, but I just kind of ignored this obvious fact, is that the crater is overstable and I was throwing directly at the cone. So when the low speed fade came in, the disc was actually sliding away from the cone. So one thing I need to do now is collect those discs and aim to the left of the cone when I'm trying to get it to fade into the cone. All right, so we've seen why this drill is so great for when you're working in an open field, but what about when you have obstructions? And for the most part, every single disc golf course is going to have obstructions inside of 200 feet. So you have to know how to navigate those things. Now, like I said, I'm at an open field, but there are some baseball fields here, and these baseball fields have some fences around them and some backstops, so we're actually going to use those to our advantage. So let's go ahead and let's practice our approaches from throwing behind trees. So right behind me, I have probably about 15 feet of fence with gaps on each side, and this is great because I can stand as far back as I want or as close to the fence depending on how pinched off I want to be. Also, it gives me an opportunity to practice hyzer and anhyzer angles for both backhand and forehand. And so that's what we're going to do. These forehand hyzers are going to be a lot trickier because I'm basically being given a gap that I have to hit, otherwise I'm going to hit the fence. So this is also really good angle and release control and height control as well. Well, that's basically it, guys. I really like this drill. It's definitely one I'm going to be using a lot more during this off season because approach shots is how you can shave so many strokes off your score. So it's important that you and I work on these things and get better so that come springtime, we can dominate the disc golf competition. I hope you found this video helpful and insightful and that you learned something new today. If you did, make sure to go ahead and you give this video a like. I really appreciate it. Until next time, guys, have a great round.